In the world of politics, every word, every gesture, and even every second of silence carries meaning. When Donald Trump mocked former President Barack Obama during one of his public appearances, the crowd expected laughter, applause, and the usual energy that surrounds Trump's rallies. But what followed was something unexpected, a brief, 7-second pause that spoke louder than his words. In those few seconds, the confidence shifted, the tone changed, and the atmosphere revealed more than any statement could. This wasn't just a political moment, it was a psychological one, exposing the deeper layers of how leaders communicate, how audiences react, and how silence can sometimes echo louder than sound. Today, we'll dive into what that moment truly represented, not just for Trump or Obama, but for the entire political stage and the way people perceive power, respect, in reality in modern-day politics. Silence is often considered a space between words, a pause to catch breath or collect thoughts, but in moments of high attention, it can transform into one of the most powerful communicative tools imaginable. In the world of politics, where every phrase is rehearsed and every gesture calculated, silence can reveal what words attempt to conceal. When Trump mocked Obama and then suddenly fell silent for 7 seconds, that pause became more than just an awkward gap, it became a message in itself. Those few seconds created an invisible tension that every listener could feel, and in that tension, people began to see the contrast between bravado and vulnerability. The power of silence lies in its unpredictability. It disrupts the expected flow of speech and forces the audience to interpret what is happening, to seek meaning where none was intended to be explicit. Trump's pause, intentional or not, turned into a magnifying glass through which observers analyzed his tone, his confidence, and his control over the moment. In communication, silence can serve multiple roles. It can emphasize authority, expose uncertainty, or highlight emotion. When used strategically, it can heighten suspense, draw focus, and even manipulate the crowd's psychological response. But when it appears unexpectedly, as in this case, it often reveals something unintended. Trump's 7-second stillness after mocking Obama created a ripple effect that extended beyond the immediate audience. People on social media dissected it, analysts replayed it, and critics interpreted it as hesitation, doubt, or even a fleeting moment of realization. Silence, therefore, became the language of interpretation. It gave the public a window into the unspoken dimension of his communication, showing that what a leader does not say can sometimes outweigh what they do say. Throughout history, silence has been used as a rhetorical device. Great orators like Martin Luther King Jr., Winston Churchill, and even Barack Obama himself understood how a pause could strengthen a message. The difference lies in intention. When these leaders paused, they did so to allow their words to resonate. When Trump paused, it seemed as though his words had resonated too strongly, even for himself. The audience sensed the disconnect, that brief suspension where confidence appeared to falter. This is the core of silence's power. It strips away the protective layer of speech and exposes the raw human moment beneath. When the voice stops, the truth seeps through. Psychologists often refer to silence as a mirror of emotion. In a heated or humorous setting, an unexpected pause can indicate cognitive overload, uncertainty, or an involuntary emotional response. In Trump's case, it was as though the mockery reached an internal boundary, a momentary reflection or perhaps a search for validation that didn't immediately arrive. Those watching were left to fill that void with their own interpretations, and that's where silence becomes dangerous for public figures. Unlike words, which can be clarified or rephrased, silence belongs to the listener. Every person perceives it differently, giving it countless meanings that can't be controlled by the speaker. This uncontrollable nature of silence makes it one of the most honest elements of communication. In media-driven politics, where performance often overshadows content, moments of silence break the rhythm and invite scrutiny. Audiences are conditioned to constant stimulation, sound bites, slogans, applause lines, but silence forces a break in that pattern. It demands attention, creates discomfort, and leaves an imprint that lasts longer than noise. When Trump paused, people weren't just watching him, they were studying him. Each second stretched longer because it wasn't filled with rhetoric. It was filled with speculation. Was he reconsidering what he said? Was he waiting for laughter that never came? Was it a calculated dramatic pause or an unintended exposure of uncertainty? These questions became more significant than the mockery itself. Silence, in the realm of influence, operates like a double-edged sword. It can elevate a speaker to appear thoughtful and composed, or it can make them appear lost and unprepared. The power lies not in the pause itself but in the perception of it. Trump's persona thrives on dominance, energy, and unwavering confidence, thus, a pause becomes an interruption in that performance. It offers a fleeting glimpse behind the curtain, a reminder that even the loudest figures can encounter moments where silence betrays them. For supporters, it may have seemed like an intentional pause to build suspense, but for critics, it was interpreted as a moment of weakness. The beauty and complexity of silence is that it accommodates both interpretations simultaneously, allowing each observer to find their own truth within it. From a rhetorical standpoint, silence amplifies emotional resonance. After a sharp comment or a controversial statement, a pause gives the audience time to absorb and react. In Trump's case, that pause followed mockery, a moment where laughter was expected but didn't come immediately. The silence filled the gap between intention and reaction, transforming the atmosphere from humor to unease. Silence does not exist in isolation, it interacts with the audience's expectations. When people anticipate sound and receive none, their minds become hyperactive, analyzing tone, body language, and context. This is why silence can be louder than speech, it triggers interpretation rather than instruction. Moreover, the power of silence extends beyond individual psychology into collective behavior. When a crowd experiences a shared silence, it becomes a communal moment of awareness. Every second feels heavier because everyone knows they're witnessing something unscripted. It's a break in the pattern, a moment that can shift perception instantly. In Trump's case, the crowd's reaction, or lack thereof, became part of the spectacle. Silence in a crowd can feel awkward or even rebellious, and that energy reflects back on the speaker. It's as though the silence itself speaks on behalf of the people, saying what they cannot or choose not to express. The art of communication isn't just about what is said, but about the spaces that hold the words together. Silence is one of those spaces, an invisible thread that can either hold the message firmly or unravel it entirely. Trump's 7-second pause will be remembered not because of the words that came before it, but because it disrupted the rhythm of his usual bravado. It became a moment of collective observation, where the audience, commentators, and even the silence itself seemed to analyze him. That's the paradox of power in speech. Sometimes, when you stop talking, the truth begins to speak. The psychological and public impact of Trump's unexpected pause after mocking Obama reaches far beyond that moment itself. It reflects how audiences interpret leadership, confidence, and emotional control. In politics, every second of reaction time, every shift in tone, every hesitation is measured and magnified by millions of eyes. When Trump paused for those 7 seconds, the silence wasn't just heard, it was felt. That pause became an unspoken question mark hanging in the air, inviting observers to fill it with meaning. Psychologically, silence can provoke discomfort, curiosity, or even introspection, and in a setting where Trump's voice usually dominates the space, that absence of sound carried even more weight. People aren't used to silence from figures like Trump, whose energy and bravado define his public persona. Therefore, when he went quiet, it felt like an interruption in a familiar rhythm, a break in his usual control, and the human mind instinctively seeks to understand such deviations. In crowd psychology, pauses can shift the emotional tone of an audience within seconds. Laughter that was anticipated doesn't arrive, smiles fade, and in those moments of uncertainty, people begin looking to one another for cues on how to react. Trump's audience, conditioned to respond with enthusiasm or applause, suddenly found itself in a brief state of collective hesitation. This kind of silence spreads fast, creating what psychologists call a social pause, where the group instinctively mirrors the uncertainty of the speaker. The pause transforms from an individual lapse into a shared experience. This is what makes the public impact of Trump's silence so powerful. It wasn't merely his reaction but also the audience's inability to immediately interpret it. In that instant, both leader and followers were caught in a moment of mutual confusion, revealing the fragility of performative confidence. The psychological impact of such moments is amplified by media repetition. When clips of the silence were replayed and analyzed, people didn't just see the pause, they felt it again and again, each time reinterpreting it through different emotional lenses. Some viewers saw awkwardness, others saw calculation, and many saw vulnerability. Silence in media coverage operates differently than in live events. It becomes stretched, frozen, and magnified. The 7 seconds turn into a symbol, a meme, a topic of commentary. The human brain is wired to notice anomalies, and in the case of a figure known for dominating every second of airtime, silence is the biggest anomaly possible. It disrupts expectations, and that disruption triggers emotional reactions. People start asking themselves what that silence means, whether it was deliberate, whether it revealed something deeper. The ambiguity makes the moment memorable, which is why it spread so quickly online and stayed in public conversation. From a psychological perspective, the audience's interpretation of silence often depends on pre-existing attitudes toward the speaker. Supporters may view a pause as a sign of reflection or strategic control, while opponents interpret it as hesitation or loss of confidence. In Trump's case, the silence served as a projection surface for both sides. For those who already doubted him, it confirmed their belief that his mockery was forced or insincere. For his supporters, it might have looked like composure or a deliberate rhetorical device. This duality is what makes silence so powerful. It allows multiple narratives to coexist without contradiction. In essence, silence invites the audience to write the next line in the story, and the mind rarely leaves such gaps unfilled. Publicly, the impact of this silence also touches on the cultural perception of strength. In political theater, dominance is often equated with uninterrupted speech, quick comebacks, and loud delivery. A pause, however brief, challenges that dynamic. It introduces a human element, a crack in the armor that people notice immediately. The public tends to hold political figures to superhuman standards of control, expecting them never to falter or hesitate. When they do, it reminds people that these figures are human, capable of error, doubt, or emotion. That reminder can be either endearing or damaging, depending on the audience's relationship with the figure. Trump's 7 seconds became a reminder that even the most assertive personalities are not immune to the psychological effects of silence and self-reflection. The moment also exposed the fine balance between confidence and overconfidence. Trump's style has always relied on continuous motion, talking, gesturing, commanding the space. The pause disrupted that rhythm and, in doing so, altered his psychological connection with the audience. The sudden lack of sound gave the crowd time to think rather than react, and in political communication, thinking time can be dangerous for a speaker who thrives on emotion and immediacy. That is why silence can have such a strong public impact. It forces contemplation where enthusiasm usually prevails. When audiences are given space to analyze, they become more self-aware of their reactions, and that awareness can weaken the emotional hold of a charismatic speaker. On a subconscious level, silence can evoke feelings of discomfort because humans are conditioned to associate speech with control. When a leader goes quiet, it challenges the perception of control, even if the pause lasts only moments. That psychological discomfort radiates outward. The audience feels it, the commentators amplify it, and the public conversation extends it. This cycle transforms a small pause into a cultural moment. The 7 seconds become symbolic of uncertainty, regardless of whether that was truly the case. In Trump's instance, the pause took on a life of its own, reshaped by interpretation, repetition, and amplification through media. The more people discussed it, the more it evolved from a fleeting silence into a public statement of its own. Furthermore, the impact of silence becomes stronger in figures who are defined by sound. Trump's entire political identity is built on speech, provocative, rapid, unfiltered. His silence, therefore, feels exaggerated because it stands in contrast to everything audiences expect from him. This contrast intensifies the psychological response. When something so uncharacteristic occurs, it becomes an event, a point of collective fascination. It's the same psychological mechanism that makes people replay awkward pauses in interviews or speeches. Our minds are drawn to incongruence because it disrupts narrative flow. In this case, Trump's silence disrupted not only his narrative but also the narrative his supporters and critics had constructed about his unshakable confidence. The public reaction also reveals the growing influence of emotional storytelling in political media. Instead of analyzing policy or ideology, audiences are drawn to moments that reveal personality, emotion, or perceived weakness. A 7-second pause becomes newsworthy because it feels authentic, raw, and unscripted in a world saturated with rehearsed rhetoric. The irony is that silence, a lack of words, often generates more engagement than 1,000 spoken ones. This shows how the psychological and public dimensions of communication have evolved. People now seek moments that feel real, even if they're born from discomfort. Trump's silence met that desire perfectly. Ultimately, the psychological and public impact of that 7-second pause demonstrates how silence can reshape narratives, challenge perceptions, and expose the fragile boundary between confidence and doubt. It shows that even in the age of constant speech, moments of quiet still have the power to dominate attention, provoke emotion, and redefine how leaders are perceived by the world around them. A single moment can redefine political perception and audience response, especially when it disrupts the rhythm people have come to expect from a leader. In modern politics, perception is power, and power often relies on performance. Every gesture, facial expression, and pause can shift the public's view of a political figure within seconds. When Trump mocked Obama and then paused for those unexpected 7 seconds, the silence created a new lens through which audiences interpreted his demeanor, confidence, and authenticity. That brief gap didn't just reflect uncertainty, it altered the way people saw him in that moment. Political perception is fragile. It doesn't rely solely on speeches or policies but on the emotional connection a leader forms with their audience. The 7-second silence cracked that emotional rhythm, forcing observers to reassess the persona they had grown accustomed to seeing. What was once seen as unwavering confidence suddenly seemed questionable, and that shift, even if temporary, can change how people remember a political event. In politics, moments like these are rare because they are unpredictable. Most political communication is meticulously scripted, but the most powerful perceptions are often formed during unscripted moments. Trump's pause was one of those unscripted disruptions that drew attention not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. The human brain processes silence differently than speech. When a speaker stops unexpectedly, the audience's cognitive focus intensifies. They begin to scrutinize body language, tone, and expression. Every flicker of emotion becomes amplified. During Trump's pause, his facial expression and body language became the message, and audiences interpreted them through their own biases and expectations. Supporters tried to rationalize the silence as intentional or strategic, while critics viewed it as an unintentional revelation of weakness or discomfort. In both cases, perception was being rewritten in real time, shaped by emotion rather than logic. The most fascinating aspect of this shift is how quickly a single moment can override long-standing narratives. Trump's public persona is built on dominance, assertiveness, and relentless energy. The pause contradicted that image for a few seconds, and those seconds were enough for observers to glimpse a different side of him. Political perception thrives on consistency. The moment consistency breaks, perception begins to bend. A 7-second silence in Trump's energetic pattern felt like a crack in the facade. This doesn't necessarily diminish his influence, but it exposes how easily political identity can be reinterpreted by the audience when something unexpected happens. People remember anomalies more vividly than patterns, and in that sense, the silence became more memorable than the mockery itself. Audience response in politics is deeply emotional and collective. When a leader speaks, the crowd's reactions, cheers, laughter, applause, become part of the performance. They create a feedback loop that reinforces authority and connection. But when that loop breaks, as it did during Trump's pause, the crowd's uncertainty becomes visible. Silence from a speaker produces silence in the audience, and that mirrored hesitation changes the entire atmosphere. The energy that fuels a political rally or speech begins to waver, and in that moment, people become conscious of the performance rather than immersed in it. Trump's pause triggered that awareness, causing the audience to briefly step outside the emotional experience and view it analytically. That small shift in audience psychology has the power to redefine how they perceive the speaker's control and authenticity. In political communication, control is everything. The ability to steer an audience's emotions through tone, rhythm, and timing defines how powerful a message feels. A well-timed pause can emphasize strength, but an unplanned silence can do the opposite. It transfers control from the speaker to the listeners. During Trump's 7 seconds of silence, that transfer occurred. The crowd, commentators, and even viewers at home became the ones interpreting meaning, effectively seizing narrative power from the speaker. Once that happens, perception becomes decentralized. The leader no longer dictates what the moment means, the people do. That shift is what makes such moments politically transformative. They democratize interpretation and expose how dependent charisma is on continuous engagement. The redefinition of political perception also ties closely to the visual era we live in. With social media amplifying every second of footage, a moment of silence can become a viral symbol before the speaker even finishes the event. Clips are replayed, slowed down, captioned, and dissected by millions. Every replay reshapes the perception further. A pause that might have felt insignificant in person becomes monumental online, where the silence feels longer, heavier, and more symbolic. Trump's 7-second silence evolved this way. It transformed from a live moment into a piece of visual rhetoric, endlessly reinterpreted by audiences across platforms. In this sense, perception is no longer shaped by what the speaker intends but by how audiences edit, share, and emotionally respond to fragments of reality. The relationship between leader and audience is built on psychological projection. People don't just see a politician, they see what they want that politician to represent: strength, rebellion, intelligence, honesty, or stability. When a moment breaks that projection, even subtly, it forces a recalibration. The pause after Trump's mockery of Obama disrupted the projected image of flawless dominance. For some, it made him seem more human, more relatable; for others, it made him appear less in control. Both interpretations alter political perception because they redefine the boundaries of how people relate to the leader emotionally. This process happens subconsciously. It's not about rational analysis but about how the moment makes people feel. Silence, with all its ambiguity, allows people to feel rather than think, and those feelings often outlast any speech or argument. Political perception also depends on contrast, how one leader's behavior compares to another's. Trump's mocking of Obama set up an immediate comparison between the two, and the following silence magnified that contrast. Obama's style is known for measured calmness and rhetorical control, while Trump's is known for intensity and improvisation. The silence blurred that distinction for a moment, as if Trump unintentionally stepped into the kind of reflective stillness associated with his opponent. This comparison strengthened the moment's symbolism, making it more than a slip. It became a reflection of two opposing styles meeting in silence. That juxtaposition redefined how people perceived Trump's composure in comparison to Obama's. Audience response is not merely emotional, it's performative. In political events, people often mirror the energy of the speaker to signal alignment or approval. When silence enters that space, it disrupts that synchronization. The audience becomes uncertain of what emotion to display, and that uncertainty can quickly transform into awkwardness. This collective hesitation leaves a lasting impression because it represents a rare breakdown in the machinery of political performance. Trump's 7-second pause exposed that breakdown. It turned the audience from active participants into observers, and that change in dynamic reshaped how they experienced the moment and the man at the center of it. Ultimately, this single moment revealed how fragile political perception truly is. Decades of crafted image and communication strategy can be altered by a few seconds that feel unscripted. Silence does not just fill time, it fills imagination. It invites people to see, feel, and decide for themselves what it means. Trump's 7-second pause after mocking Obama demonstrated that leadership perception is not built only on words, but on how a leader handles the spaces between them. Those spaces, however brief, can redefine authority, reshape audience response, and linger in the collective memory long after the sound has faded.